this technology is that it's captivated our lives in ways that certainly our parents and grandparents would not have been captivated by it, I think. But in Plato's dialogue, Phaedrus, he lets us in on a conversation between Thuth and the inventor of the pen, and Thamus the king, who, when the inventor presents his invention, he tells the king that, oh, this is an extraordinary new technology. It's going to do wonders. It's going to enable human beings to preserve their knowledge. Well, the king tells him it's not for the inventor to tell us what the benefit of the invention is, but for others who are going to look at the invention to tell. And the king tells him that it's quite the opposite of what you think, that the introduction of the pen is going to cause the loss of knowledge and not the preservation of knowledge, because people will no longer rely on their memories, that knowledge won't come from inside of themselves, but from outside of themselves. The interesting thing about that story is that inventors often, in fact almost always, invariably tell us about the upsides of their technology and their inventions. And they rarely look at the downside of the inventions or the externalities. So in the past, people were extremely wary of innovations. In fact, the word invention had a very negative connotation in ancient Greece. It had a negative connotation in the Christian world and the Muslim world. Our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Iyaka wa muhdathat al-umur." Beware of novelties, because religion by its very nature is a conservative enterprise. It wants to conserve the best, but it also is very wary of destabilizing elements. When things change too rapidly, things become destabilized. And so it's very interesting that it was Machiavelli who really put a positive spin on inventions in The Prince. There's a real change after Machiavelli in the approach to invention. We have a Muslim juristic principle among our scholastics, which Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya really emphasizes, and he himself is somebody who uses this. It's called an-nadhr al-ma'alat, looking at the consequences of things, looking down the road. So one of the modern myths that many progressives will constantly remind us is that you can't stop progress. There are many iterations of this. One of them is you can't turn the clock back. And I think there's some ideas embedded or assumptions embedded in this. One of them is that progress is good by its nature, and also that it's a juggernaut. It's an unstoppable force that we simply have to submit to. So I want to argue that we actually have historical examples to counter both those views. I won't bother to spend much time on the idea that progress is always beneficial. But one example, when the car was first invented, there was a lot of pushback in cities about the cars because they were very noisy and problematic. But one of the arguments was it was so much cleaner than the horse. So we can put that one to rest. But there are other really interesting examples. So another one is in the Second Lateral Council under Pope Innocent II in 1139, in this great city-state that we are in now. He actually outlawed the use of crossbows because he considered them to be unethical. And he said they were not something that a Christian could engage in. And he actually said, quote, "The crossbow is an instrument of the devil and hateful to God and unfit for Christians." So part of what makes that technology so odious was that it could take a peasant who could learn to use it in a week, and he could destroy an armored knight, because the crossbow could actually penetrate the armor. And this knight, who took 10 years to master his martial arts, would simply be killed at the hand of this peasant. In 1589, an inventor in England, William Lee, attempted to convince Queen Elizabeth to support a knitting machine that would replace hand knitting. Lord Hunson asked the Queen to grant Lee a patent and to use crown money to invest in a factory to produce the machine. The Queen refused, saying, my lord, I have too much love for my poor people who obtain their bread by knitting to give money to forward an invention which will tend to their ruin by depriving them of employment." In his remarkable book, Giving Up the Gun, Noel Perrin shows us that the Japanese, who at the time in the 17th century comprised one of the most advanced pre-modern societies on earth, the Japanese were actually, once the gun was introduced into Japan in 1543, they became the finest producers and mass producers of the musket. They actually developed a musket that was also waterproof, which was one of the main problems in Europe during using muskets in warfare. But interestingly enough, there were three shoguns, Nobunaga and Hideyoshi and Lord Tokugawa. And these people unified the warring principalities of Japan and actually outlawed the gun. And so for 300 years, Japan actually chose to reject a technology. This is a really important historical example of where a society decided, and part of the reason for the decision was, again, they saw that it was, one, a cruel way of killing people, but another, that a samurai who spent 20 years mastering the martial arts could be killed by a peasant with a musket. Another really interesting example is in the Ottoman Empire. For almost 300 years, they chose not to use the Gutenberg printing press of movable print. One of the myths is they did it because they were worried about knowledge coming in to the Ottoman Empire, which is actually not true. The main reason why they did not use the printing press is there were tens of thousands of scribes that would have lost their jobs because of this. And I think this is an aspect that we really don't think about when we think about AI. Rabbi Rosen and I were part of the C100 at the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab came in to us one day, all of the quote-unquote religious leaders, and said, we're moving along whether you keep up with us or not, but we're waiting for your ethical ideas, but we're just going to move along with or without you. So this idea somehow that, oh, we can work with these ethical considerations, technology is moving on. One of the things that is really important to remember is, and in this great institution of the Catholic Church, they took very seriously the 5 intellectual virtues. Well, the least of them is technique. The least of them is technique. Technology is the least, the craft. Over that is phronesis, which is prudence. How do we use our technology prudently? And you have nous and episteme and wisdom, the highest. Another really important thing to think about is the wise ancient Greek had the engineer, Hephaestus, was actually crippled. And his enemy was Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The reason that Hephaestus, I think, was crippled is because technologies tend to cripple us. We're all using the crutches of technology now. And each time we adopt a new technology, we lose something of our autonomy. It becomes a crutch. And most of us can't even imagine life now without a cell phone. And yet the vast majority of us in this room are old enough to remember how life was without a cell phone. Our young people won't remember that. They have no idea of what a world without cell phones was like. But I think most of us do remember it, and perhaps fondly. Again, the idea that you can't stop progress. I think it's a very dangerous idea if that progress is harmful. And this gets back to what Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya pointed out of the idea of harm, the prohibition of harm and reciprocating harm. So one of the really tragic aspects of modern technology, I think, is the alienating nature of the technology, the distraction of the technology, the fact that we're constantly checking our cell phones, we're constantly being distracted. Well, it's very interesting that Bethlehem, which was the first mental hospital in England, was actually called Bethlehem for the incurably distracted. We forget that distraction in English actually means mentally deranged. Right? And so Franz Kafka, who I consider actually a formidable theologian, said that evil is whatever distracts. And the great Catholic tradition has acedia as one of the 7 deadly sins, which could be interpreted, sometimes it's translated as sloth, meaning like a spiritual laziness, but it was actually understood by the great church desert fathers as distractibility. this idea of constantly being distracted. And I think this is what a lot of people are suffering from. So we now have a massive mental illness crisis. There are many, many factors to it, but I think one of the real factors is the types of technology that our young people are being exposed to and are growing up with. We have a fentanyl crisis in the United States that's taking about 55,000 lives a year. Marx reminded us when he said that religion was the sigh of the oppressed creatures, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. In other words, Marx was actually trying to understand why people needed religion. Well, part of the reason was to numb them of the pain of the world, because it's a difficult place to be. If we don't have religion, then opium becomes the opium of the people. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warned us of the latter days, the antichristic period. One of the things that he told us about the Antichrist, that he would make the sky pour forth rain, he would make the blind see, cure the leopard, he would have mountains of wheat to satiate the poor who would follow him in hopes of gaining that benefit. He said that he would travel in every city in 40 days. They asked him how he would do that. He said, like a wind that leaves behind a cloud. And so I think it's very interesting that we have to really think seriously about where this technology is going. Because I travel a lot. I go to universities. I walk through colleges. I see everybody bent over these machines. Something really has changed in a very short period of time. And change should always be considered with great deliberation. So where we're going, I don't know. But I think we have to think seriously about the dangers of AI, what people are going to do, and then also cui bono, who benefits from artificial intelligence? Who benefits from it? When we eliminate all these jobs, when people get universal incomes, what are they going to do? How are they going to live? What is the purpose of life? What type of meaning in life will they have? I think these are all serious questions that we have to greatly consider. Our prophet, in conclusion, has one of the verses that was revealed in the Quran. It's a great question. It's a question that was well known in this city, Quo Vadis. Where then are you going? The Quran says, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where then are you going? And I think this is something we have to ask ourselves, because God allows U-turns on the road of life. And I think the possibilities of metanoia should be very seriously considered. Thank you.
For really challenging us, both conceptually, with regards to the fallacy of inevitable progress through technology, like, of course, the fallacy of unlimited economic growth. But even if these are fallacies, we, of course, face the enormous challenge of how difficult it is to put the genie back into the bottle, and whether it's possible to impose the discipline necessary once the dam is busted. I think actually within Jewish tradition, for example, the Sabbath is perhaps the most important response to modern technology in terms of limiting us. In observant families, there's no operation technology, no smartphones, no televisions, no radios, if such things exist anymore, which they probably don't. But if once people have no longer are imbibing that discipline with their mother's milk, it's almost impossible to try to really reintroduce them to it. That's the enormous challenge.